Please, my daughter, my children are hungry. They need food.
Take this, my dad will buy me another one.
Billionaire daughter's generous act of kindness. The shadow of grace. The Lagos sun, a relentless, molten coin in the afternoon sky, beat down on the glossy black hood of the bulletproof Range Rover. Inside, the world was a capsule of chilled, perfumed air. 5-year-old Ifeoma Adesina, her legs swinging from the plush leather seat, pressed her nose against the cool glass, her breath forming a tiny foggy circle. Her mother, Kayamika, sat beside her, a vision of elegant composure in a simple but exquisitely tailored Ankara dress. Yet, her eyes, soft and watchful, were not on her phone or the city's blur, but on the vibrant, struggling tapestry of life unfolding beyond the traffic jam. "Mummy, why have we stopped?" Ifeoma asked, turning from the window. The car had pulled over not at their sleek Ikoyi home or a luxury mall, but on a bustling, sun-scorched side street in Abilene, where the air hummed with a different energy, a symphony of honking okadas, hawkers' cries, and the dense, living scent of roadside food, exhaust, and humanity. Kayamika smiled, a gesture that seemed to soften the very light in the car. "We have seen a friend, Ife, she said, her voice a gentle melody. "Look." She pointed discreetly to the shade under a sprawling, dusty neem tree. There, an elderly woman sat on an upturned plastic crate, her face a map of deep lines, her hands busy sorting through a small pile of withered vegetables. A faded wrapper was tied around her waist, and her eyes held a weary patience that spoke of decades of such afternoons. To Ifeoma, the woman was not a stranger. She was a fixture in the landscape of her outings with her mother. She was Mama Nkechi, who sold gugaru, roasted corn, in the dry season. She was Uncle Tund, the one-legged newspaper vendor with a laugh like rolling thunder. They were her mother's friends. Kayamika reached for a woven basket at her feet, not a designer handbag, but a simple, sturdy one made from cane. From it, she pulled 2 neat packages wrapped in banana leaves. "Come," she said, opening her door. The wall of heat and noise rushed in, but Kayamika stepped into it, as if entering a familiar room. Ifeoma scrambled after her, her tiny hand immediately enveloped in her mother's secure grasp. They crossed the few feet of dusty earth. The old woman looked up, and her worn face transformed. It wasn't just a smile of hope for alms. It was a smile of recognition, of genuine warmth. "Nnem, my daughter," the woman exclaimed, her voice raspy but strong. "You have come again." "Good afternoon, Mama Chioma," Kayamika greeted, kneeling gracefully, her dress pooling in the red dust. She did not hand over the packages from a height. She brought herself down to eye level. "How is the back today?" "Ah, the son is physiotherapist," Mama Chioma chuckled, waving a hand. "It warms the ache. And this one?" She nodded to Ifeoma, her eyes twinkling. "She is growing like a proud Irako tree." Ifeoma beamed, hiding slightly behind her mother's arm, but watching intently. Kayamika presented the packages. "This is some oaf, nsala, and pounded yam. Still warm." "And this," she said, placing a second, smaller package in the woman's hands, "is some ointment for your joints, and a little something for your granddaughter's school books." Mama Chioma's eyes glistened. She took Kayamika's hands, not the packages first. Her gnarled fingers patted the smooth, younger ones. "You are a blessing from God. Not just for this," she gestured to the food, "but for seeing this old woman. Easy eye, NWA, good child." They spoke for a few more minutes, about Mama Chioma's granddaughter, about the rising price of kerosene. Kayamika listened, truly listened. Finally, she pressed a folded note into the woman's palm, a discreet act, hidden from the bustling street. As they stood to leave, Mama Chioma's blessing followed them. "Shinik gozi yinu. Yadibi yinu, God bless you. May he keep you." Back in the cool cocoon of the car, Ifeoma was quiet for a moment, watching the world outside resume its frantic pace. "Mummy," she finally asked, her brow furrowed in thought. We have food at home. Why do we bring her ours? Kayamika looked at her daughter, her gaze profound. She reached out and tucked a braid behind Ifeoma's ear. We have more than food at home, my love. We have enough. And when you have enough, it becomes a river. A river must flow, or it becomes stagnant and sad. We let it flow to places where the ground is too dry. Ifeoma pondered this, the concept of wealth as a flowing river taking root in her young mind. But there are many dry places, she observed, looking out at the passing streets teeming with people. Yes, Kayamika said, her voice softening with a hint of a memory's pain. There are. I know how that dry ground feels, NWAM. I know the taste of hunger that sits in your mouth like metal. I know the fear of tomorrow having nothing. Your grandmama and I, we knew it well. So now, when I see that dryness in another's eyes, my spirit cannot walk past. It is like seeing my own mother, my younger self, sitting there. She turned Ifeoma's face gently towards her. We are not just giving food or money. We are giving a reminder that they are seen, that they matter to someone, to God, that they are not alone in their struggle. That is the real gift. The car turned into the sweeping, guarded driveway of their mansion, a palace of marble and glass. But the lesson of the afternoon wasn't left in the dusty street. It traveled with them, carried in the basket now empty of packages but full of purpose. Ifeoma watched her mother hang up her sun hat, her movements serene and sure. She saw the quiet, fulfilled light on her face, a light that was brighter, somehow, than after any fancy party or shopping trip. That night, as her mother tucked her into bed, Ifeoma clutched her stuffed giraffe and whispered, Mummy, when I grow up, I want my river to flow too. Kayamika's eyes filled with tender, unshed tears. She kissed Ifeoma's forehead, her heart swelling with a love deeper than any ocean. It already does, my precious one, she whispered back. It already does. In the darkness, Ifeoma drifted to sleep, not dreaming of toys or cartoons, but of flowing rivers and dry earth turning green, and of her mother's hands, always reaching out, bridging the world between the palace and the dust. Lessons in the dust. Ifeoma's world, at 4 years old, was a universe of deliberate imitation. She mimicked the precise way her father tapped his pen while reading financial reports. She parroted the melodic inflections of her nanny's Igbo lullabies. But her most sacred, studied mimicry was reserved for her mother. She watched the way Kayamika tilted her head when listening, the specific fold of her hands in prayer, the gentle cadence of her voice when speaking to their gardeners. Above all, she watched the giving. It was no longer a passive observation. It had become a prepared ritual. One Saturday morning, Kayamika was packing the cane basket. Today, it contained small bags of rice, beans, tins of milk, and packets of biscuits. Ifeoma stood beside her in the vast, sunlit pantry, her own small, pink polka-dotted backpack at her feet. Mummy, is mine ready? She asked, her voice brimming with solemn importance. Kayamika turned, a smile playing on her lips. Let me see your preparations, Field Marshal. Ifeoma unzipped her backpack with great ceremony. Inside, neatly arranged, were her contributions. For small bottles of water she had insisted the housekeeper help her seal, a handful of her favorite chocolate-coated biscuits wrapped in a napkin, 2 shiny apples, and from her own toy chest, a small, cuddly teddy bear with one eye slightly loose. For a sad baby, Ifeoma explained, pointing to the bear. Kayamika's heart clenched with a fierce, sweet ache. She knelt, taking her daughter's small hands. This is beautiful, NWAM, perfect. But remember, we are not going to a party. We are visiting friends who are having a very hard time. Their hearts might be heavy. Our job is to be gentle, like a soft breeze. Ifeoma nodded, her large eyes absorbing the instruction. A soft breeze, she repeated quietly. Their destination that day was not a street corner, but a modest, somewhat dilapidated community hall in Surulere, where a local NGO was distributing aid to a group of internally displaced women and their children. The air inside was thick with the scent of bodies, hope, and faint despair. Ifioma, holding tightly to her mother's hand, initially shrank back from the noise and the crowd of unfamiliar faces. She pressed her cheek against her mother's dress. But then she saw Kayamika's posture change. The elegant billionaire's wife seemed to shed an invisible layer, her shoulders softening, her height diminishing as she sought to connect, not tower. Kayamika moved to a young woman sitting on a bench, a sleeping infant tied to her back with a wrapper, a vacant look in her eyes. She didn't start with a basket. She started with a touch, a light hand on the woman's shoulder. "Kidu, how are you managing?" Kayamika asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if sharing a secret. The woman blinked, the vacancy clearing slightly into surprise, then a glimmer of recognition of shared humanity. She began to speak, her words a low, pained stream about the journey from the north, the fear, the hunger. Ifioma watched, mesmerized. She saw how her mother's entire being focused on the woman. She wasn't just waiting to give the gifts. She was first receiving the story. The basket sat at her feet, forgotten for the moment. When the woman paused, Kayamika finally reached into her basket, pulling out the tin of milk and a bag of rice. "This is for the strength of you and this mighty soldier on your back," she said, tapping the baby's foot gently. She also slipped a folded note into the bag, a practice Ifioma now understood was for dignity. It was Ifioma's cue. Tugging her mother's dress, she whispered, "My turn." Kayamika nodded. Ifioma unslung her pink backpack, wrestled with the zip, and carefully extracted one bottle of water and a packet of biscuits. She approached the woman, her steps small but determined. "For you," she said, holding them out. Then, remembering her mother's lesson from the car, she added in her high, clear voice, "So you know you are not alone." The effect was electric. The young woman's face, which had only thawed slightly, completely melted. A tear escaped, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She took the offerings as if they were holy relics. "Thank you, small angel," she whispered, her voice cracking. "God will bless your little hands." The joy that flooded Ifioma was a new, profound sensation. It wasn't the fleeting thrill of a new toy. It was a warm, golden glow that started in her chest and spread to her fingertips. She had done it. She had been the soft breeze. For the next hour, she was Kayamika's shadow, her miniature ambassador. She gave an apple to a boy with a quiet cough, placing it in his hands with a serious, "Eat for health." She presented the one-eyed teddy bear to a little girl clinging to her mother's leg. The girl stared, then clutched the bear to her face, a tiny smile appearing. Each time, Ifioma looked to her mother for confirmation. Each time, Kayamika's response was a small, proud nod, a deeper communication than words. In the car going home, Ifioma was buzzing, not with leftover energy, but with the residue of that golden glow. Her backpack was empty, but she felt fuller than ever. "Mummy, the lady called me an angel," she stated, gazing at her own small hands in her lap as if seeing them for the first time. Kayamika reached over, enveloping Ifioma's hands in her own. "You were a helper today. You saw someone's need, and you used what you had to meet it. That is one of the most powerful things a person can ever be." She paused, choosing her words for the young, philosophical mind beside her. "The food, the money, they are important, but they are like the body of the gift. The soul of the gift is what you said. You are not alone." That is what your spirit was doing. It was saying, "I see you. Your struggle matters to me. That soul is what heals." Ifioma leaned her head against her mother's arm, the scent of her perfume mingling with the faint, lingering smell of the community hall. The concepts were big: soul, spirit, healing, but in the warm, safe circle of her mother's presence, they felt simple and true. That night, as Kayamika brushed her hair before bed, Ifeoma looked at their reflection in the mirror, the beautiful, kind-faced woman and her miniature version. "Mummy," she said, her eyes heavy with impending sleep, but still holding onto the day's light. "I want my spirit to always do that, to always see." Kayamika stopped brushing, her eyes meeting her daughter's in the glass. In that mirrored gaze, she saw the fragile, magnificent beginning of a legacy not of wealth, but of witness. She saw the river beginning to find its course. "Then it will, my love," she murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of Ifeoma's head. "Just keep watching, and keep learning to see." The unseen storm. At first, it was just a tiredness, a fatigue that a weekend at the family's beach house in Tarqua Bay couldn't fix. Kayamika, a woman whose energy had always been a quiet, steady force, powering her through law school, building her foundation, managing the intricate dance of her public and private life, found herself needing to pause at the top of the staircase, her hand resting lightly on the banister for just a moment too long. "Mummy, come see." Ifeoma's voice, a bright bell, would ring from the garden where she was attempting to help the gardener water the roses. Kayamika would smile, push off from the banister, and the moment would pass, dismissed as the natural toll of a busy life. But the moments accumulated. The vibrant woman who used to dance with Ifeoma in the kitchen after dinner now often sat with a cup of tea, watching the dancing instead. The basket for their outings remained packed in the pantry for days, then a week. Ifeoma would sometimes drag it out, looking up at her mother with a question in her eyes. "Not today, NWAM," Kayamika would say, her voice still sweet but layered with a new, thin veneer of effort. "Mummy's bones are asking for a rest. Come, we'll read a story instead." Chijioke noticed. In the deep, intuitive way of a man who had loved the same woman for half his life, he sensed a shift in her atmosphere. "Chi, you're working too hard," he said one evening, massaging her shoulders as she leaned back on the sofa, her eyes closed. "The foundation can run itself for a month. Let's go to Switzerland. Just the three of us. Breathe some cold air." She had patted his hand, her eyes opening to show that familiar, loving light, but dimmer, as if viewed through a faint haze. "It's just Lagos exhaustion, Nwok M. It gets into your blood. Maybe after the rainy season." He booked the trip to Switzerland anyway. First-class tickets, a secluded chalet. But the rainy season came and went, and Kayamika's tiredness didn't recede. It deepened, transforming into something more sinister. A loss of appetite, sharp, fleeting pains in her side, she tried to laugh off as old age, though she was only 38. The turning point was a Wednesday. Ifeoma, now a lively 4.5-year-old, had been trying to show her mother a somersault on the sprawling living room rug. Kayamika, clapping gently from her armchair, suddenly went very still. A wave of pain, swift and brutal, washed over her face, bleaching her lips of color. She didn't cry out, but her knuckles turned white where they gripped the chair's upholstery. "Mummy." Ifeoma stopped mid-roll, her childish senses screaming alarm. The pain passed, leaving Kayamika breathless and visibly shaken. She forced a smile. "Just a stubborn stitch, my eagle. You fly so fast you gave me wings." But the lie was fragile. That night, Chijioke found her in their walk-in closet, leaning against the shelves, her forehead damp with the cold sweat. "That's it," he said, his voice brooking no argument. It was no longer a suggestion. It was a command born of fear. The following days were a blur of hushed voices and sterile rooms. They started at the best private hospital in Lagos, with doctors who knew the Adesina name. Tests were run, scans taken. The initial answers were vague: a complex abdominal presentation, need for more specialized diagnostics. The fear, once a whisper, began to speak in full sentences. Chijioke moved mountains. Within a week, Kayamika and he were on a plane to the Mayo Clinic. Ifeoma stayed behind with her beloved nanny, Aya Agba, who told her mummy and daddy had gone to make sure her tiredness medicine was just right. In Minnesota, Surrounded by cutting-edge medicine and brutal efficiency, the storm was given its name. It was no longer just fatigue or pain. It was a tyrant, stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. It had spread silently and with devastating cleverness to her liver and the lining of her abdomen. The phrase, inoperable, hung in the air of the consultant's office, a death knell dressed in clinical language. Kayamika absorbed the news with a terrifying calm. She asked precise questions about timelines, about palliative care options, about quality of life. Chijiok, the billionaire who negotiated continent-shaping deals, sat beside her, shattered. His world, built on the foundation of her presence, was crumbling into a void he could not comprehend. "We will fight," he rasped, his hand clutching hers as if to physically hold her soul in place. "We will live," she corrected softly, her gaze steady on his. "Whatever time is left, we will live it." They returned to Lagos, not with the cure, but with a battle plan of chemotherapy, a desperate, hope-against-hope campaign to buy time. The mansion transformed. A wing was converted into a state-of-the-art home clinic. Nurses in soft-soled shoes became part of the household. The vibrant Ankara dresses were replaced by soft cashmere wraps and pajamas. Ifeoma's world reoriented around the new son of her mother's illness. The outings stopped completely. Her lessons took place in her mother's bedroom, on the king-sized bed now dotted with medicine bottles. They read stories, but slower. They drew pictures, but Kayamika's hands, once so steady, now sometimes trembled. "Where is the basket, Mummy?" Ifeoma asked one afternoon, curled against her mother's side, which felt bonier each day. Kayamika's eyes, large and luminous in her thinning face, filled with tears she refused to shed. "The basket is resting, my love. Like Mummy. But your basket," she tapped Ifeoma's chest gently. "The one in here. That one is still full. You can still be the soft breeze for Daddy, for Aya Agba, for me." "Okay." Ifeoma nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of a new responsibility. For 6 brutal months, the unseen storm raged inside Kayamika's body. The chemotherapy was a brutal ally, attacking the tyrant but also laying waste to the kingdom. Her hair, that beautiful, thick crown, fell out. Ifeoma, with a child's blunt practicality, helped her pick out soft, colorful scarves, declaring each one more beautiful than feathers. Through the nausea, the weakness, the pain, Kayamika clung to moments. She insisted on being wheeled to the garden to watch Ifeoma play. She listened, with closed eyes and a smile, as Ifeoma read her favorite picture book, making up half the words. She and Chijiok would talk late into the night, not of empires or legacies, but of memories. Their first meeting at University of Lagos, his terrible attempt at cooking jollof rice, the day Ifeoma was born. One quiet evening, as the golden Lagos sunset painted her room, Kayamika held both their hands, Chijiok's large and trembling, Ifeoma's small and warm. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the force of a final will. "Chijiok, promise me. Do not let her grow up in a fortress. Let her river flow. Help her see." To Ifeoma, she said, "Remember the soul of the gift, Ifeam. The seeing. Never stop." She fell into a sleep from which she did not wake. The storm, having conquered its territory, passed, leaving behind a landscape of profound, echoing silence. The fortress, for all its marble and guards, had been breached by a loss no wealth could fortify. Ifeoma, at 5 years old, was left with a father hollowed out by grief, a basket in the pantry that gathered dust, and a heart full of lessons with no teacher. The river, it seemed, had been dammed at its source. The echoing fortress, the silence after Kayamika's death, was not an absence of sound. It was a presence. It lived in the grand, marbled halls of the Adesina mansion, a thick, invisible fog that muffled the clink of cutlery at the long dining table, swallowed the echoes of footsteps on the polished floor, and turned the laughter of the fountain in the courtyard into a hollow, rhythmic sigh. For Chijioke, the world had lost its color and its meaning. He moved through his days as a ghost in his own home, a shell of the decisive, powerful man he had been. His grief was a leaden suit he could not remove, weighing down his shoulders, slowing his speech, distancing the light behind his eyes. The only pinprick of reality, the only thread tethering him to the earth, was Iphioma. And so he built a fortress, not of stone and metal. They already lived within one, but of cotton wool, velvet, and relentless, smothering provision. His love, twisted by anguish and a terrified promise he didn't yet know how to keep, manifested as a flood of things. Iphioma's 5th birthday arrived, a month after the funeral. Before, it would have been a garden party with a clown, a magician, and a table groaning with treats for a few dozen children. Kayamika would have insisted on inviting children from one of her charity homes. Instead, Chijioke hired an entire, internationally renowned children's theater troupe to perform a private, 2-hour extravaganza in their ballroom. A life-sized animatronic pony from Japan stood in the corner, a bow on its neck. A mountain of wrapped gifts from every luxury brand known to man rose in the center of the room. The guest list was just Iphioma, her nanny Aya Agba, and a dozen solemn, watchful staff members. Iphioma, in a dress so stiff with French lace it seemed to wear her, sat on a throne-like chair. She watched the performers with polite, wide eyes, clapping when Aya Agba gently prompted her. When they brought out the towering cake, a replica of her favorite storybook castle, she looked at it, then at the empty seat beside her father where her mother should have been, and her lower lip trembled. The fortress, for all its dazzling spectacle, was achingly cold. The gifts continued, a daily avalanche meant to fill the silence. If a toy was advertised on the children's channel, it arrived by courier the next day. If she mentioned a fondness for a particular fruit, crates of it were air-freighted from the country of origin. Her playroom became a museum of untouched luxury. A miniature electric car she was too scared to drive, a dollhouse more elaborate than a real apartment, a wardrobe of designer children's wear with tags still attached. But the thing Iphioma wanted most, the warm, living weight of her mother's presence, the shared secret smile, the preparation of the basket, was the one thing the fortress could not provide. She tried to speak of it. One evening, as Chijioke mechanically read her a bedtime story, his voice a flat monotone, she interrupted. "Daddy, is Mummy's basket still in the pantry?" He paused, the book hovering in midair. The question was a shard of glass, slicing through the numbness. He cleared his throat. "Yes, NWAM. It is there. Can we take it? There is a man who sells groundnuts by the gate. He looks like his throat is dusty." Chijioke's heart contracted. He saw Kayamika's spirit flickering in his daughter's eyes, and it was a pain so acute it felt like panic. To engage with that world, the world of dusty throats and need, was to step back into the raw, open wound of his loss. It was to acknowledge a reality where Kayamika's kindness was still needed, and she was not here to give it. "Not today, Iphioma," he said, his voice firmer than he intended. "The man is fine. Security gives him something. You have new paints in your room. Should we look at those?" He saw the light of purpose in her eyes dim, replaced by a confused resignation. The fortress walls grew thicker. Iphioma's world became a gilded routine. School lessons with a private tutor in the sunroom. Lunch with a nutritionist plan menu. Playtime in the manicured, sterile garden, always under the watchful eye of Aya Agba or a bodyguard. The high walls and electric gates kept the chaotic, vibrant, real Lagos at bay. It kept out the noise, the struggle, the unpredictability. It also kept out the memory of her mother's truest self. She began to have quiet, stubborn rebellions. She would take a shiny new toy and deliberately leave it in the rain, as if testing whether its perfection could withstand reality. She asked Aya Agba for akara and beans instead of her imported pasta, seeking a taste that felt like memory. At night, she no longer prayed for toys. She prayed for the dream of the flowing river, and sometimes she thought she could hear it, a distant, muffled sound, trapped behind a great, silent dam. Chijioke, watching her from a distance through his grief, saw a different child. He saw a quiet, compliant little girl who had everything. He told himself she was safe. She was provided for. He was upholding the physical aspects of his promise. She lacked nothing. But the soul of his promise, help her see, was locked away with Kayamika's scarves in the bedroom closet, a relic too painful to touch. The fortress was perfect, impenetrable, and utterly hollow. Within its echoing halls, a billionaire grieved a ghost, and a little girl, drowning in a sea of everything, quietly starved for the one thing that had given her world its meaning, the chance to give a piece of it away. The river was dammed, and the silence around it grew, waiting for the first, inevitable crack. An anniversary request. Time, in the echoing fortress, became a strange and viscous thing. The seasons changed. The fierce, dry harmattan winds gave way to the cloying humidity of the rains, which in turn faded back to sun. But inside the mansion, a perpetual, tempered climate remained. A year had passed, a year marked not by growth, but by a careful, expensive stasis. The anniversary of Kayamika's death approached like a shadow lengthening across the compound. Chijioke felt it in his bones, a deep, familiar ache that intensified with each passing day. He busied himself with work, taking calls at all hours, burying himself in spreadsheets and acquisition plans for continents away, anything to outrun the quiet. Ifioma, now 6, felt it too, though her understanding was different. It was a feeling in the air, a certain gentle sadness in Aya Agba's voice when she braided her hair, a way her father would sometimes just stop and stare out a window, seeing nothing in the present. Her mother's absence had become a permanent shape in their lives, a silhouette they had learned to navigate around. But on this day, the shape felt more solid, more demanding of recognition. It was a bright Saturday morning. Chijioke sat in his study, attempting to review a contract. The words blurred before him. All he could see was Kayamika's face on this day a year ago, pale against the pillows but lit with a fierce, final love. A soft knock interrupted the silence. The door, heavy mahogany, swung open just enough for Ifioma to slip through. She was dressed not in one of her stiff, fancy dresses, but in a simple yellow sundress, one her mother had bought her on a trip to a local market. In her hands, she clutched a slightly rumpled piece of drawing paper. "Daddy," her voice, so small in the vast, book-lined room, pulled him instantly from the abyss. He set the papers down, managing a smile that felt like cracked clay. "Come in, NWAM. What do you have there?" She patted across the Persian rug and climbed onto the large leather chair opposite his desk, her feet dangling. She placed the drawing on the polished wood between them. It was a picture of 3 stick figures. A tall one in blue, him, a medium one in green with a big smile, her mother, with a yellow circle above her head for heaven, and a small one in yellow, herself. They were standing before a lopsided building with many small stick children waving from the windows. Arrows, drawn in red crayon, pointed from their hands to the building, labeled in her careful, blocky letters, "Gifts and food." Chijioke stared at the drawing, his throat tight. "It's today," Ifioma stated, not as a question. "The day Mummy went to heaven." He could only nod, his voice trapped somewhere beneath the weight in his chest. Ifioma pointed a small finger at the green stick figure. "Mummy always said," she said, "heaven is closest to where the needy are." She recited the words perfectly, a cherished line from a well-remembered sermon. She looked up, her eyes, those mirrors of her mother's, holding not grief, but a solemn purpose. "Can we go make heaven close today?" Chijioke felt the air leave his lungs. The request was so simple, so devastatingly pure. It bypassed all his adult strategies of mourning, the silence, the isolation, the stoicism. It went straight to the heart of who Kayamika had been and what she had built her life upon. Can we take gifts to the orphanage like she did? Ifioma pressed, her gaze unwavering. We can use the basket. I can help pack it. The basket. The words were a key turning in a long rusted lock. He saw it clearly. The woven cane basket, sitting in the dark pantry, a silent monument to a past life. He saw Kayamika's hands placing items inside with such intention. He saw Ifioma, smaller, adding her own bottled water and biscuits. A storm of emotion warred within him. The old, protective panic that wanted to keep her safe within their walls, away from the pain and need of the outside world. And this new, fragile, aching pull towards the very thing his wife had lived for. Ifioma, seeing his hesitation, slid off the chair and came around the desk. She placed her small hand on his knee, a gesture of such mature comfort it broke him. We don't have to stay long, Daddy. We can just go and let the river flow. Like Mummy said, that did it. The mention of the river, the direct echo of Kayamika's philosophy from her lips, shattered the last of his resistance. A tear, hot and shameful, escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. He covered her small hand with his own large, trembling one. He looked from her hopeful face to the earnest crayon drawing, a child's map to a place of healing. Yes, he whispered, the words scraping raw from his throat. He cleared it, nodded more firmly. Yes, NWAM. We will. He looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since her mother died, and saw not just a child to be protected, but a guide. We will go make heaven close. The transformation in Ifioma was instantaneous. The solemn purpose bloomed into a radiant, luminous joy. It was the first true, unshadowed joy he had seen on her face in a year. It was her mother's smile. I'll go tell Aya Agba, she exclaimed, snatching her drawing and spinning towards the door. We have to pack the basket. The real one. As she dashed out, her yellow dress a streak of sunlight, Chijioke remained in his chair. The leaden suit of grief was still there, but it felt different. It felt shared, and for the first time, the act of remembering his wife didn't feel like a plunge into a dark, lonely ocean. It felt like following a small, bright boat, piloted by their daughter, towards a shore he had been too afraid to seek. The fortress gate, held shut by fear and memory, was creaking open, not to let the world's pain in, but to let their own healing out. Avenue of Hope. For the first time in a year, the air inside the Black Range Rover was charged with a nervous, sacred energy. It was not the quiet, chilled emptiness of their previous journeys. The cane basket, dusted off and gleaming with a faint patina of use, sat securely on the seat between Chijioke and Ifioma. It was filled not by Kayamika's meticulous hands, but by a joint effort. Bags of rice, beans, tinned milk, and cartons of biscuits chosen by the housekeeper under Ifioma's serious supervision, and, in a smaller bag tied to the handle, Ifioma's own contribution, colorful pencils, drawing books, and a selection of her less played with, but still cherished, soft toys. Ifioma was a portrait of focused solemnity. She wore the same yellow sundress, as if it were a uniform for this mission. She held the smaller bag on her lap, her fingers tracing the embroidered pattern on the cloth. She watched the city stream by, not with her usual detached curiosity, but with an active, searching gaze, as if relearning the landscape through her mother's eyes. Chijioke, for his part, felt strangely disembodied. He was performing a role, the philanthropist. He had done this 1,000 times, cutting ribbons, giving speeches, signing checks for causes. But this was different. This was not a transaction mediated by boards and reports. This was raw, personal, and driven by the small, warm hand that occasionally reached over to pat the basket, as if reassuring it. Their destination, the Avenue of Hope orphanage in the heart of Abute Meta, was a modest 2-story building, its once bright blue paint faded by sun and rain. A vibrant mural of children holding hands around a globe adorned the front wall, battling valiantly against the encroaching grime of the street. As their car pulled up, a small crowd of children of varying ages, clad in a mismatched harmony of donated clothes, gathered near the gate, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and wariness. Sister Agnes, the director, a woman whose stout frame and kind, weary eyes spoke of decades of quiet battle, emerged to greet them. Her handshake with Chijioke was firm, but her smile for Ifeoma was instantaneous and genuine. "Welcome, small madam," she said, her voice like gravel softened by rain. "We have been expecting you. The children are very happy for the visit." Ifeoma, suddenly shy, moved closer to her father's leg, but did not hide. She clutched her bag and gave a small, formal nod. The next hour unfolded in a series of moments that etched themselves onto Chijioke's soul. He watched, initially from a slight distance, as Sister Agnes and two older boys helped unload the bulk supplies from the car: the rice, the beans. The children's cheers at the sight of the cartons of biscuits were unrestrained, a joyful noise that seemed to shake dust from the rafters. But the true ceremony was Ifeoma's. Sister Agnes led her to a common room where the younger children sat on woven mats. Ifeoma stood before them, a small, yellow-clad figure of immense gravity. She opened her bag. She did not simply hand out the toys and books. She had a method learned from a master. She would look at a child, really look, then choose. A stuffed rabbit with one floppy ear for a little boy who was sucking his thumb. A box of colored pencils and a drawing book for a girl who was tracing patterns in the dust on the floor. Her movements were slow, deliberate, imbued with a sense of ritual. "This is for you," she would say softly, each time making sure the item was placed in the child's hands. To the boy with the rabbit, she added, "His ear is like that because he listens extra hard." The boy stared, then hugged the rabbit fiercely to his chest. Chijioke felt a painful, beautiful cracking in the region of his heart. He was not watching his daughter give away toys. He was watching Kayamika's spirit animate her small form. He saw the same gentle focus, the same desire to see the individual need. This was not the performance of charity. It was the communion of kindness. He found himself drawn in from his observer's distance. A brave little girl with large, curious eyes toddled up to him and held out a broken plastic car. Wordlessly, she demanded his attention. He knelt, his expensive trousers meeting the clean-swept but worn concrete floor. He took the car, examined it with exaggerated seriousness. He said, his voice rough with disuse in this new context. "I think this one needs a very strong mechanic. Or maybe a magic spell." He pretended to tinker with it, then blew on it gently. The little girl watched, mesmerized. He handed it back. "Try it now." She pushed it along the floor. It still wobbled, but she giggled as if it were now a Ferrari. In that giggle, Chijioke felt a shard of the icy grief around his heart melt and fall away. The climax came as they were preparing to leave. The children, emboldened by joy and sugar, gathered around. Sister Agnes nodded, and they began to sing, a simple song of thanksgiving, their voices high, sweet, and slightly off-key. They clapped their hands, their faces turned up to Ifeoma and her father, not as billionaires, but as bringers of a joyful afternoon. "God bless you, oh. God bless your papa, oh. Make heaven day wait for Una," they sang, their prayers direct and powerful. Ifeoma beamed, a light of pure, uncomplicated happiness radiating from her. She waved, her earlier solemnity replaced by a child's delight and shared joy. Chijioke stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. As the children's voices washed over him, he did not hear a plea for more. He heard an anthem of resilience, a melody of hope. And he felt, for the first time in a year, a corresponding chord resonate within his own hollowed-out chest. In the car going home, the basket was empty. The silence between them was different, not hollow, but peaceful, filled with the echo of singing. Ifeoma leaned her head against his arm, exhausted but glowing. "Daddy," She sighed, her eyes closing. Heaven was close today. I felt it. He looked down at her, at the dust from the orphanage floor on the hem of her yellow dress, at the smudge of biscuit on her cheek. He saw not a loss, but a continuation. The fortress gate was not just open. A bridge had been built from its steps. Yes, NWAM. He murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scents of child, dust, and honest sweat. It was. The river, so long dammed, had found a crack, and its first trickle had brought with it not the feared pain of the world, but its surprising, healing grace. The corner of the walkway. The success of the orphanage visit established a new, fragile rhythm in the Adesina household. The fortress remained, but its gates now opened on a schedule, allowing in chinks of purposeful light. Chijioke, while still a man shrouded in grief, found himself listening more. He started noticing the small, determined ways his daughter sought to emulate her mother, sharing her dessert with the house staff, asking Aya Agba about her grandson's school fees. The leaden suit of his sorrow was still there, but it felt less like a prison and more like a heavy coat he was learning to move in. A few weeks later, on a balmy evening when the setting sun gilded the edges of the Ikoyi skyline, Chijioke suggested a walk. It was a simple, domestic idea that would have been unthinkable a month prior. Ifeoma, clutching a small, shiny box from a patisserie, her reward for mastering a difficult piano piece, skipped alongside him in the exclusive park near their home. The path was clean, lined with blooming hibiscus and flamboyant trees, a manicured oasis of tranquility. Wealthy residents walked dogs, joggers panted past, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and money. Ifeoma was chattering about her lesson, the chocolate eclair inside the box a promised treasure. Chijioke nodded, half listening, his mind soothed by the normalcy of the scene. This was the world he had built for her, safe, beautiful, orderly. Then, Ifeoma's steps faltered. Her chatter died mid-sentence. She stopped so abruptly that Chijioke, lost in thought, took 2 more steps before realizing she was no longer beside him. He turned. She was standing statue still, her gaze fixed on a point just off the pristine walkway, near a corner where a particularly lush hibiscus bush spilled crimson blossoms. The park's designers had intended it to be a spot of beauty, a natural screen. But nature and humanity had other plans. Tucked into that corner, partly shielded by the vibrant flowers, was a pocket of a different reality. A thin, faded mat was spread on the ground. Seated on it was a woman. She could not have been more than 30, but hardship had etched premature lines around her eyes and mouth, telling a story of sun and worry. Her clothes were clean but threadbare, a faded Ankara wrapper and a blouse that had been mended with care. And around her, like a silent, sleepy constellation, were 4 tiny girls. Quadruplets, each about a year old. They were clean, their hair neatly braided in tiny cornrows, a testament to a mother's devotion in the face of impossibility. They sat or lay listlessly on the mat, their large eyes taking in the world with a stillness that was unnatural for their age. A worn cardboard sign rested against the bush, the handwritten "Please stark and simple. Please help me feed my babies." Chijioke's first instinct was a sharp, paternal pull. This was the world he kept out. This was the raw need, the confronting struggle. He wanted to gently steer Ifeoma away, to shield her from this tableau of desperation, to return to their bubble of ice cream and piano lessons. He opened his mouth to suggest they turn back, but he saw the look on his daughter's face. It wasn't shock or pity or fear. It was a profound, unsettling recognition. Her head was tilted exactly as Kayamika's used to be when she listened to someone's story. In her small hand, the shiny patisserie box suddenly seemed not like a treat, but like an object with newfound, urgent weight. She didn't look at him for permission. She didn't ask a question. The lessons from the pantry, from the dusty streets of Oberland, from the community hall in Surelier, they had calcified into instinct. This was what the basket was for. This was where the river was supposed to flow. Holding the box carefully in both hands, Ifioma took a small, decisive step off the perfect path. Her shiny Mary Janes left the smooth concrete and met the slightly uneven earth. Then another step. She was walking towards the woman, her yellow sundress a bright beacon against the green of the bush. Chijioke's breath caught. Every protective fiber in his being screamed to stop her, to intervene. But he was paralyzed, not by fear, but by memory. He was watching a reenactment of a sacred play, and his daughter was playing her mother's part with a conviction that left him awestruck. He remained on the path, a sentinel in the dusk, as Ifioma closed the distance between two universes. The woman, Aisha, had seen them approach. Her posture had stiffened, a defensive weariness in her eyes, expecting to be shooed away, to be ignored, to be met with the averted gazes of the privileged. What she did not expect was a beautifully dressed little girl walking directly up to her, holding out a pristine white box tied with a gold ribbon. Ifioma stopped before the mat. She looked from Aisha's tired face to the four pairs of identical, curious eyes staring back at her. She didn't smile a childish smile. Her expression was one of grave courtesy. "Good evening, Auntie," she said, her voice clear as crystal in the quiet corner. "My mummy in heaven says you should eat this." She extended the box. "It's my favorite. It will make you strong for your babies." In the golden haze of the setting sun, Chijioke witnessed it. He saw the exact moment the words landed. He saw the hard shell of Aisha's resignation shatter. Her eyes, dry from too many tears unshed, welled up instantly. A tremor went through her thin frame. This was not alms. This was not a coin tossed from a distance. This was a child, speaking of a mother in heaven, offering her own favorite thing. It was kindness of such staggering purity that it broke through a year's worth of fortified despair. Aisha's hands, calloused and delicate, rose. They trembled as they took the box, not as a handout, but as a holy offering. "Thank you, small madam," she whispered, the words thick with emotion. "God bless you. God bless your mother." From his place on the path, Chijioke saw the joy, raw, disbelieving, radiant joy, break over Aisha's face like a sunrise. It was the same transformative joy he had glimpsed on Mama Chioma's face, on the young displaced mother's face. It was the joy his wife had lived to create. And it was this joy, not the poverty or the desperation, that finally moved his feet. The dam within him didn't just crack, it gave way. He stepped off the path, leaving the orderly world behind, and walked toward the corner of the walkway where his daughter had just performed a miracle of remembrance. The river was no longer trickling. It was beginning to flow. The offering. Ifioma stood very still, the warmth of the pastry box now transferred to Aisha's trembling hands. She watched as the woman stared at the gift, not opening it, but holding it as if it were something fragile and holy. The four little girls, sensing a shift in their mother's energy, stirred. One of them, the one with a tiny, red ribbon tied to the end of a cornrow, made a soft sound and reached a small hand towards the shiny gold bowl. Aisha pulled the box back slightly, a protective, instinctive move. "No, no, Amara," she whispered, her voice still thick. This is from an angel." The word hung in the air between them. Ifioma didn't feel like an angel. She felt like she had simply done what was obvious, what was necessary. The space on the mat where the box had been in her hands felt empty, but her heart felt full in a strange, buzzing way. She looked at the other three girls. Awa, who was chewing on the hem of her worn dress. Alhari, who was watching a butterfly with profound concentration. Anu, who was starting to fuss softly. They were so many. They were so small. She felt a large, familiar presence at her side before she saw him. Her father's shadow fell across the mat, long and protective in the slanting evening light. She looked up. He wasn't wearing the tight, worried look he sometimes had when she ventured too near the mansion gates. Instead, his face was soft, his eyes fixed on Aisha with an expression Ifeoma couldn't quite name. It looked like he was remembering something. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was different too. Not the booming daddy voice or the flat, distant voice from the study. It was quiet, like Sister Agnes's voice at the orphanage. "Aisha, sir," the woman replied, her head bowing slightly in a gesture of ingrained respect mixed with wariness. She clutched the pastry box to her chest. Chijioke nodded slowly, his gaze taking in the meager mat, the single small bag of belongings, the four clean but listless infants. His eyes lingered on the sign. "Please help me feed my babies." The starkness of it, contrasted with the ridiculous abundance of his own life, was a physical blow. "These are your children?" he asked, though the answer was evident. "Yes, sir. Quadruplets. One blessing for times." Aisha's voice gained a sliver of pride, quickly overshadowed by the crushing weight of reality. "They are 1 year and 2 months." Ifeoma did the math on her fingers. They were younger than she had been when her mother got sick. The thought made her chest feel tight. Chijioke was silent for a long moment. The sounds of the park, the distant laughter, a barking dog, seemed to fade away. In this corner, there was only this woman, these children, his daughter, and the ghost of his wife urging him forward. He knelt. It was an awkward movement for a man of his size and stature, in his tailored trousers on the dusty ground. He brought himself to the level of the mat. Ifeoma watched, fascinated. He was doing what Mummy used to do. "Aisha," he said, his voice low and steady. "You cannot feed 4 babies with 1 box of pastries, no matter how fine they are." He stated it not as a criticism, but as a simple, undeniable fact. "And they look like they need more than bread." He turned his head and looked at Ifeoma. In his eyes, she saw a question and a shared resolve. She gave a small, firm nod. He stood up, brushing the dust from his knees, a futile, automatic gesture. "Come," he said to Aisha, his tone leaving no room for refusal. It was the voice of a man used to command, but now wielded for a different purpose. "Get your babies. We are all going to get something proper to eat." Aisha's eyes widened in pure, uncomprehending shock. For a second, she seemed to shrink back, as if the offer itself was a threat. "Sir, we are not presentable for a restaurant," she stammered, her hand fluttering over her faded wrapper. Chijioke almost smiled, a sad, gentle twist of his lips. "Tonight," he said, "we are not going to a restaurant for presentation. We are going for food. Please." It was the please that did it. The humility in the word from a man who clearly never had to ask for anything broke through her fear. With movements born of frantic practice, she began gathering her daughters. Ifeoma immediately stepped forward. "I can carry one," she announced, holding out her arms. Aisha hesitated, then gently guided the curious, ribbon-wearing Amara towards Ifeoma. "Hold her like this, support her bottom," Aisha instructed softly, placing the light, warm bundle into Ifeoma's eager arms. The weight of the child was a shock, so solid, so real, so trusting. Ifeoma held her breath, a fierce protectiveness surging through her small frame. Chijioke, without a word, bent and scooped up 2 of the toddlers, Awa and Alhuri, as if they were parcels of the most precious silk. They let out little squeaks of surprise but settled against his broad chest, their tiny heads finding crooks in his shoulders. Aisha lifted the fussing Anu, along with their pitifully small bag. And so, the strange procession made its way out of the park. The billionaire in his designer shirt with 2 sleepy 1-year-olds in his arms, his daughter walking with grave importance carrying a 3rd, and a homeless mother, clutching her 4th child and a box of pastries, following them towards the waiting Range Rover. The other park-goers stared, their expressions a mix of confusion, judgment, and awe. The worlds had not just collided, they had, for a moment, merged. As the driver, wide-eyed, held the door open, Chijioke carefully installed his 2 charges into the deep leather seat. Ifeoma climbed in next, refusing to relinquish Amara. Aisha slid in last, Anu on her lap, her body tense with disbelief. Chijioke took the front passenger seat, turning to look at them all crammed in the back, his daughter holding a stranger's child as if she were her own, the mother looking like she might vanish in a puff of smoke. He met Ifeoma's gaze. Her eyes were shining with a triumphant, joyful light. In them, he saw the complete, unwavering certainty that this was right. This was what came after the offering. This was the river finding its course. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod of solidarity. The offering had been accepted. Now, the real work was about to begin. The look of joy. The interior of the Range Rover, usually a capsule of chilled, perfumed isolation, was now a warm, living pocket of humanity. It smelled of baby powder, sun-warmed skin, and the faint, sweet scent of the unopened pastries. Aisha sat rigidly on the edge of the leather seat, her body thrumming with a tension born of disbelief and a lifetime of learned caution. She held Anu tightly, as if the car might suddenly eject them. The other three girls, soothed by the gentle motion and the cool air, were quiet, their large eyes reflecting the passing city lights like tiny, captive stars. Ifeoma, however, was in her element. Amara had fallen asleep against her chest, a warm, trusting weight. Ifeoma carefully adjusted her arm, mimicking the way she'd seen Aya Agba hold infants. She felt a surge of grown-up responsibility that was profoundly satisfying. Chijioke gave the driver a quiet instruction, not for the five-star hotel restaurants he frequented, but for a family-friendly Lebanese place known for its welcoming atmosphere and vast menus. As the car navigated the bustling evening traffic, he remained turned in his seat, watching the tableau in the back. He watched Aisha. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a dazed vigilance. Her eyes darted from her daughters to the luxurious fittings of the car, to the back of the driver's head, to Chijioke himself. He could see the calculations, the fears running behind her eyes. What does he want? When will this end? What comes after the food? But then her gaze would settle on Ifeoma, on the gentle, possessive way the little girl held Amara, and a different emotion would flicker, a bewildered gratitude so deep it bordered on pain. It was this look, this raw, unguarded vulnerability, that held Chijioke captive. He was a connoisseur of human expression. He'd seen the greed in a negotiator's eyes, the sycophancy in a social climber's smile, the blank respect of his staff. But this was different. He remembered the look on Mama Chioma's face when Kayamika knelt in the dust. He remembered the displaced mother's tear when Ifeoma offered her water. It was the same look, but intensified. It was the look of joy, not the joy of a deal closed or a prize won, but the joy of being seen, precisely in your moment of greatest desperation, and being offered dignity instead of disdain, connection instead of coins. This joy was Kayamika's masterpiece. It was the product she had spent her life creating, the only currency that had ever truly mattered to her. And here it was, blooming in the tired face of a homeless mother, catalyzed by their daughter's simple, fearless act. Chijioke felt like an archaeologist who had stumbled upon the living heart of a lost civilization, his wife's civilization of kindness. The car pulled up to the restaurant. The driver moved to open Aisha's door, but she was already scrambling out, clutching Anu, overwhelmed by the bright lights and the doorman's uniform. Chijioke quickly got out and took Awa and Alhuri from the back seat. Ifeoma, with great care, handed the sleeping Amara back to her mother. They entered, a motley crew that turned heads. The manager, recognizing Chijioke, began to approach with polished deference, but stopped short at the sight of his companions. Chijioke met his gaze with a calm, unspoken authority. "A quiet table, please. Somewhere we can have space." They were led to a corner booth, semi-private. Chijioke helped Aisha settle the girls, 2 on one side of the booth, 2 on the other, propped up with cushions. Iphioma immediately slid in next to Alhuri and Anu, beginning a quiet, one-sided conversation with them. Aisha sat, her back barely touching the upholstery, her eyes on the heavy, gilt-trimmed menu as if it were a document in a foreign language. Chijiok sensed her paralysis. "Would you trust me to order for everyone?" he asked gently. Relief flooded her features. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." He ordered lavishly, but thoughtfully. Hearty lentil soup, soft, freshly baked bread, hummus, grilled chicken shish tao cut into small pieces, mild cheese pastries, bowls of yogurt. Food that was nourishing, comforting, and easy for small fingers. Then, on a whim, thinking of the wide, watching eyes, he added, and 5 bowls of vanilla ice cream, with sprinkles. While they waited, Aisha's defenses began to soften, worn down by the unaccustomed comfort and the sight of her daughters safe in a clean, warm place. She sipped the water the waiter poured, her hands trembling slightly around the crystal glass. Her eyes kept finding Iphioma, who was now showing a spoon to a fascinated Awa. "She is a very special child," Aisha said softly, almost to herself. "The way she came to us, like a small muo spirit. She said her mother in heaven sent her." Aisha's voice dropped to a whisper. "I believe her." Chijiok felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at his daughter, her face alight with engagement, and then back at Aisha. In her eyes, he no longer saw just a homeless woman. He saw a mother of 4, fighting a war with empty hands. He saw the vessel of that precious, piercing joy. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep into his bones, that this was not an encounter to end with a single meal. The offering of a pastry had been the first note. This was the beginning of the symphony. The river was not just flowing. It was seeking a new path to water a parched field. He had no idea where it would lead, but for the first time in a year, the uncertainty felt not like a threat, but like a purpose. He was ready to follow its current. Ice cream and stories. The food arrived in a fragrant, generous procession, covering the white linen tablecloth. For a moment, there was no sound but the soft clatter of cutlery and the gentle, encouraging murmurs from Chijiok and Iphioma. Aisha, after a hesitant glance, tore a piece of the warm pita bread, dipped it in hummus, and fed it to Anu. The baby's eyes widened at the new flavor, her tiny mouth working seriously. Seeing this, Aisha allowed herself a small, private bite. It was as if the simple act of eating good food in a safe place unlocked a primal relief in her body. Her shoulders, perpetually braced against the world, dropped half an inch. Iphioma, under her father's guidance, became a dedicated helper. She used her small fork to break the tender grilled chicken into minuscule pieces, arranging them on a side plate for the twins, Awa and Alhuri. She blew gently on a spoonful of lentil soup for Amara. Her focus was absolute, a tiny, capable general in the campaign against hunger. Then came the ice cream. 5 shimmering crystal coops, each with a perfect scoop of vanilla, dusted with a rainbow of sprinkles. The waiter set them down with a flourish. The quadruplets stared. Ice cream was a myth, a picture in a discarded magazine, a scent wafting from other people's tables. This was magic, made real before them. Iphioma took her spoon, dipped it into her own coupe, and carefully guided a tiny, creamy spoonful towards Alhuri's mouth. The little girl leaned forward, her lips parting in instinctive trust. The cold sweetness touched her tongue. The reaction was not immediate. There was a second of frozen surprise. Then her brow furrowed in deep sensory analysis. Then it happened. A slow, miraculous smile broke across her face. A smile so wide it crinkled her nose and showed her tiny, perfect teeth. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated delight. Seeing her sister's joy, Awa opened her mouth like a baby bird. Iphioma, giggling now, obliged. Soon, all 4 girls were experiencing the phenomenon, their initial stillness utterly vanquished by sticky, sparkling wonder. Soft babbles of pleasure filled the air. Anu clapped her sticky hands together. Amara tried to bury her face in the coop, requiring a gentle maternal interception. Aisha watched her daughter's transformation, her own spoon forgotten. The look of joy was now on four small faces, reflected and multiplied. A tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the dust that had lingered on her cheek from the park. This time, she didn't brush it away. It was a tear of witness, of a burden momentarily shared. It was this sight, the quadruplets illuminated by simple joy, and their mother witnessing it with heartbroken gratitude, that finally loosened the knot of survival tautness in Aisha's throat. The ice cream, the symbol of impossible luxury, became the key to her story. "They have never," she began, her voice a hoarse whisper. She cleared it, looking at Chijioke, then at Ifeoma, as if drawing strength from them both. "They have never had anything like this." Chijioke pushed his own coupe toward the center of the table, a silent offering for the girls. "Tell us," he said, his voice low and steady, an invitation, not a demand. And so, between small bites of ice cream and the busy work of wiping sticky chins, the story poured out. It was not a long story, but it was deep, carved by hardship. She was Aisha from Kano. She had come to Lagos with her husband, Tund, 5 years ago, bright with city dreams. He drove a Danfo bus. She sold Akara by the roadside. They lived in a single room in Ajigunal, tight but hopeful. When she became pregnant, they were thrilled. The scan revealing 4 heartbeats turned their thrill to terror, then a fierce, protective faith. The pregnancy, it was very hard, Aisha said, her hand unconsciously resting on her abdomen, remembering the enormous, painful weight. "I could not work. Tund, he drove day and night. But one bus driver's fare cannot prepare for 4 babies. The hospital bills from the birth, a miraculous but harrowing cesarean section, swallowed their meager savings and plunged them into debt. At first, he tried," she said, her gaze distant, fixed on a past only she could see. "He would come home, tired to his bones, and hold them one by one. But the crying, it never stopped. 1 would sleep, 3 would wake. The hunger, it was like a 5th child in the room, always screaming." She described the relentless cycle of feeding, washing, scrounging for formula, the darkness of a room with no light at the end of its tunnel. Then one morning, the debt collectors came. Loud, shouting. They took the television, the small generator. Her voice dropped even lower. Tun just watched. He did not fight. After they left, he looked at me, looked at the 4 of them on the bed, and his eyes were empty, like a well that has gone dry. He said, "Aisha, this mountain will bury us all." He picked up his one good shirt and walked out. That was 10 months ago. I have not seen him. The silence at the table was heavy, filled only with the soft, contented sounds of the girls. Ifeoma had stopped eating, her spoon held in midair, her young mind grappling with the image of a father walking away from his children. "I sold everything else," Aisha continued, the words coming faster now, a confession long withheld. "The Akara stall was gone. I did washing, I cleaned gutters. But with 4 babies, who will hire you? The room landlord put our things outside. So we went to the park. It is cleaner than the streets. And sometimes, people are kind." She looked directly at Ifeoma, her eyes swimming. But never so kind as today. The story hung in the air, a stark, human tapestry of love, despair, and abandonment. Chijioke saw it all now, not just a homeless woman, but a story of cascading misfortune, of a man broken by a responsibility he couldn't shoulder, of a woman who chose to be buried by the mountain rather than leave her children behind. He looked at the 4 sticky, now drowsy faces. Amara, Awa, Alhari, Anu. Not burdens, not a curse. One blessing for times. They had names. They had a story. And they had just tasted ice cream. The abstract need from the park corner had crystallized into a specific, profound human reality. The river of his wife's legacy wasn't meant for vague, anonymous charity. It was meant for this, for Aisha, whose name meant life, and for her 4 daughters, whose names meant grace, beauty, gift, and mercy. The current of purpose he'd felt earlier now had a clear, undeniable direction. The meal was ending, but Chijioke knew, with a final, unshakable certainty, that for this family, their long night in the park was over. A decision made. The last of the ice cream had been scraped from the crystal coops, leaving behind only sticky rainbows of sprinkles and a profound, satiated quiet. The quadruplets, their bellies full for the first time in recent memory, succumbed to a heavy, contented sleep. 2 were slumped against the cushioned booth. 1 lay across Aisha's lap, and Amara had somehow ended up with her head pillowed on Ifeoma's thigh, her tiny fingers curled around the hem of Ifeoma's yellow dress. Aisha watched them, the lines of anxiety on her face softened by the warm light and the unfamiliar sensation of full stillness. But as the clatter of the restaurant's kitchen faded into the background, the old, cold dread began to seep back in. The meal was a dream, a beautiful, impossible interlude. Reality waited outside. The mat, the corner, the descending night, the relentless calculation of tomorrow's survival. She straightened her shoulders slightly, the burden settling back into its familiar place. Chijioke observed this shift. He saw the gratitude in her eyes begin to be overshadowed by the practical terror of what came next. He signaled for the bill, a gesture so routine it felt alien in this charged context. As the waiter retreated, he leaned forward, his elbows on the table, steepling his fingers. It was his boardroom posture, but the intent was utterly different. Aisha, he began, his voice low but resonating with a new kind of authority, not that of a boss, but of a man who had seen a course and would chart it. You cannot go back to the park. It was a statement, blunt and undeniable. Aisha flinched as if struck. Her eyes dropped to her sleeping daughters. Sir, we have no other. I know, he interrupted, not unkindly. That is why you will not go back. He let the words hang, allowing the implication to take root. Ifeoma watched, her hand resting protectively on Amara's back, her gaze darting between her father and Aisha. What my daughter started today, Chijio continued, nodding toward Ifeoma, was not just about a box of pastries. It was about seeing you. All of you. He gestured to the sleeping girls. It is one thing to give a meal. It is another to walk away from a drowning person after handing them a cup of water. The analogy was stark, vivid. Aisha's breath hitched. My wife, Chijioke said, the words still carrying a weight that thickened his voice. She understood this. She built her life on it. She would not have let you go back to that corner. And he paused, the commitment forming fully in his heart before it reached his lips. I will not dishonor her memory by doing so. He laid out the plan then, not as a negotiation, but as the inevitable next steps. It was the mind of a strategist applied to a human crisis. Tonight, you will all stay in a hotel suite. Somewhere safe, clean, with a bath and proper beds. Not as a permanent solution, but as a place to breathe and sleep without fear. Aisha's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The thought of a bed, a locked door, hot water, it was beyond fantasy. Tomorrow, he went on, his tone shifting to the practical. My assistant will take you to see some flats. Small, clean, in a safe neighborhood where you can raise your girls. I will cover the rent for the first year. He saw her eyes widen at the scale of it and pressed on. You will receive a monthly allowance. For food, for diapers, for school fees when the time comes. Not a gift, Aisha. An investment. An investment, sir, she whispered, utterly lost. In your stability. In their future, he said, his gaze sweeping over the quadruplets. But stability is not enough. You need a purpose, a way to stand on your own feet. He recalled her mention of selling Acra, of doing washing. You said you used to sell. What did you do before the babies? What skill do you have? A faint spark ignited in Aisha's exhausted eyes. I was good with a needle, sir. In Kano, I apprenticed with a tailor. I can mend, I can make simple dresses, buba and iro. But here, I had no machine, no. You will have a machine, Chijioke stated. You will have several. I will rent a small shop for you, in a market with good foot traffic. Stock it with fabric, thread, a good iron. You will run it. You will build a business. Aisha and Daughters Tailoring, or something of the sort. He almost smiled at the alliteration. The allowance will continue until the shop can fully support you. My foundation will provide the seed capital and basic business guidance. He sat back, the plan fully articulated. It was comprehensive, life-altering. It was the exact opposite of a one-off charitable donation. It was a lifeline woven with threads of housing, sustenance, and self-determination. Aisha was trembling, tears flowing freely now, a silent river of release. She looked from the sleeping faces of her children to the determined face of the billionaire, to the hopeful face of the little girl who had started it all. The mountain that was to bury her was being moved, stone by stone, by sheer, improbable grace. Sir, I do not know what to say. This is too much. Why would you do all this for a stranger? Chijioke's eyes found Iphiom's. In her face, he saw Kayamika's quiet triumph, the peaceful certainty of a river finding its true bed. We are not strangers anymore, Aisha, he said quietly. My daughter saw you. And now, he added, his voice thick with a promise to both his wife and his own awakening soul, so do I. The decision was made. The course was set. The journey out of the park and into a new life had begun not with a check, but with a choice to truly see and the courage to act on what was seen. The fortress gates were not just open. A new road was being built from its foundation, leading outward. A shop named 4 Stars. The week that followed was a whirlwind of quiet, efficient miracles. Chijioke's executive assistant, a formidable woman named Mrs. Nwoko who was accustomed to orchestrating multi-million-dollar mergers, now found her skills applied to a different kind of portfolio. With a blend of tenderness and military precision, she became the architect of Aisha's new world. True to Chijioke's word, Aisha and the girls spent their first nights in a spacious, airy suite at a discreet service department in Acadia. The first bath Aisha took, in a clean, tiled bathroom with endless hot water, felt like a baptism. She washed away the grime of the park, the fear, the perpetual layer of exhaustion. Wrapping herself in a fluffy robe, she then bathed each of her daughters in the sink, their giggles echoing off the tiles as they splashed in the unfamiliar luxury. The next day, Mrs. Nwoko arrived with a gentle-faced nanny, Ayafemi, to mind the girls. She then escorted a shell-shocked but clean Aisha to view 2 flats. The one she chose was on the ground floor of a well-kept building in Agba, a quiet, residential neighborhood. It had 2 sunlit bedrooms, a small living area, a functional kitchen, and, most importantly, a tiny, gated yard where the girls could play. The rent for a year was paid in advance, and a fridge and cupboards were already stocked with essentials. Aisha walked through the empty rooms, her feet silent on the cool tile. She touched the walls, the window grills, the kitchen sink. It was not a palace, but it was a fortress of her own, a fortress of safety. She sank to the floor in the middle of the living room and wept, this time with the overwhelming relief of a landed refugee. But Chijioke's vision extended beyond shelter. The following afternoon, Mrs. Nwoko took Aisha to a bustling, covered market in Ajij. Tucked between a fabric merchant and a hair salon was a vacant shopfront, its windows grimy but intact. The sign above the door was blank. "This is it," Mrs. Nwoko said, unlocking the padlock. Inside was a single room, dusty and empty, smelling of old wood and possibility. "Mr. Adesina has secured a 2-year lease. It is yours." Aisha stood in the center, turning slowly. She saw not emptiness, but potential. She could see the counter there, the cutting table here, the sewing machines along that wall. A vision, dormant for years, flickered to life behind her eyes. 2 days later, The transformation began. Carpenters came to build a sturdy counter and shelves. Electricians installed bright, energy-saving bulbs. Then, the delivery that made Aisha's hands fly to her heart. For brand new, electric sewing machines, their black bodies sleek and promising. A heavy-duty ironing board and a professional steam iron followed. Bolts of plain and patterned Ankara, stacks of thread, zippers, buttons, and measuring tapes arrived in neat boxes. On the final day, as the workmen put the finishing touches on the freshly painted pale blue walls, a van arrived. Two men carefully unloaded a custom-made sign. It was not flashy, but it was beautifully crafted from polished wood. In clear, white lettering, it read, Aisha and the 4 Stars Tailoring. Beneath the name, in a smaller, graceful script, it stated, Fine alterations and traditional wear. Aisha stared at the sign as the men mounted it above her shop window. The 4 stars. Amara, Alwa, Alhari, Anu. Not a burden, but her guiding constellation, her reason for being, now etched into the very identity of her livelihood. Her chest swelled with a pride so fierce it stole her breath. Mrs. Nwoko handed her the keys, to the flat and to the shop. Mr. Adezena's instructions are clear, she said, her usual stern demeanor softened. The monthly allowance will be transferred to the new bank account we opened for you. It will cover your living expenses and the small salaries for Ayafemi and a shop assistant we will help you hire. This will continue for 1 year, or until your shop's profits comfortably exceed it. The foundation will also provide a simple bookkeeping system and a mentor, a retired tailor, to visit you weekly for advice. The rest, she said, gesturing to the shining machines and the stacks of fabric, is up to you. That evening, Chijioke and Ifeoma came to see. The shop was ready, glowing like a jewel in the bustling market alley. Ifeoma ran her small hand over the smooth surface of a sewing machine. You can make beautiful things here, Auntie Aisha. Aisha, overcome, could only nod. She turned to Chijioke, her eyes shining with tears that were no longer of despair, but of a dawning, formidable hope. Sir, how can I ever? He raised a hand, stopping her. The how is now your story to write, Aisha. This shop, this name, he pointed to the sign, is the first chapter. Your daughters will grow up knowing their mother is a businesswoman. That is the truest gift. As they drove away, Ifeoma looked back at the little blue shop, the new sign gleaming under a street lamp. Daddy, it looks like a real star, she whispered. Chijioke put an arm around her, pulling her close. He looked back as well, at the tangible proof of a decision made in a restaurant over melting ice cream. It was more than a shop, it was a landmark. It marked the point where pity had turned to partnership, where charity had been woven into the durable fabric of opportunity. The river of his wife's legacy had not just watered a parched field. It had helped plant a garden, and now they had hung a sign on the gate. The current had carried them here, to this unassuming alley in Ajij, and it felt, unmistakably, like a place called hope. Sunday sacredness. A new rhythm began to beat in the heart of the Adesina household, a rhythm as steady and cherished as a church bell. It was the rhythm of Sunday. The first visit to Aisha's flat, the Sunday after the shop sign was hung, was tentative. Ifeoma had asked, as she did every morning that week, "Is it Sunday yet, Daddy?" When the day finally arrived, she dressed herself with intense care in a simple blue pinafore, rejecting the more elaborate dresses in her wardrobe. She packed a small bag with 2 picture books and a set of wooden building blocks. Chijioke felt a flicker of the old anxiety as their car navigated from the wide, tree-lined avenues of Ikoyi into the vibrant, densely packed streets of Agba. This was his daughter, entering a world of crowded markets, buzzing okadas, and homes stacked close together. But the memory of the look of joy and the sight of Ifeoma's eager face pressed to the window silenced his fears. When they arrived, Aisha was waiting at the open gate of her building, the quadruplets lined up beside her like curious, matching chicks. They were dressed in bright, identical frocks made from offcuts of Ankara from the shop, Aisha's first official creations. The girls, now well-fed and sleeping in beds, were transforming daily. The listlessness was gone, replaced by a buzzing, inquisitive energy. "Small madam," Aisha called out, her face breaking into a wide, unguarded smile. Ifioma scrambled out of the car, her bag bumping against her legs. The initial greeting was a shy, formal affair, handshakes and small curtsies from Ifioma to the girls. But it lasted only seconds. Amara, the boldest, reached out and grabbed the hem of Ifioma's pinafore. Ifioma laughed, a bright, free sound Chijioke realized he hadn't heard in a very long time. She knelt, opening her bag. The offering of the blocks was all it took. In an instant, the five of them were a tangle on the small, clean rug in Aisha's living room. Chijioke stood in the doorway, a giant in the modest space, feeling both out of place and utterly welcomed. Aisha hurried to bring him a chair. "Please, sir, sit. Can I get you something? Water? Soft drink. Water is fine, Aisha. Thank you." He sat, watching the scene unfold. Ifioma was showing Awa how to stack a tower. Alhuri was carefully placing a block in her mouth for inspection, and Ifioma gently pried it away, saying, "No, that's for building, not for eating," with a seriousness that made Aisha cover her mouth to hide a laugh. The ice was irreversibly broken. That first Sunday set the template. It became sacred, non-negotiable. After church service at the Grand Cathedral, Ifioma would turn to her father, not with a question, but with a statement. "Daddy, it is time to go to Auntie Aisha's." And they would go. Chijioke's role evolved from observer to participant. He became the designated horse, lying on his back on the rug while four squealing one-year-olds took turns being gently lifted into the air for airplane rides. His deep, rumbling laughter became a fixture in the small flat. He helped mend a wobbly kitchen chair. He listened as Aisha, growing more confident each week, talked about her shop, her first customer, a difficult zipper repair, her dream to one day make a full Ibada suit. Ifioma, in this space, was not a billionaire's daughter. She was big sister. She fed the girls their afternoon pap, wearing more of it than they did. She read them stories from her picture books, inventing elaborate tales where the four stars in the sky came down to have adventures on Earth. She was in charge of toy distribution and conflict resolution over a coveted red block. In their presence, the quiet, solemn child from the fortress vanished, replaced by a playful, patient, joyful little girl. One Sunday, Chijioke arrived with a simple football. The girls were still too unsteady for it, but Ifioma took it into the tiny yard. She began kicking it gently against the wall. Thump, thump, thump. Amara, watching from the doorway, wobbled to her feet, toddled over, and gave the ball a tentative push with her foot. It rolled a few inches. A look of astonishment, then triumph, crossed her face. "Daddy, look," Ifioma cried. "Amara is playing." Soon, all four were involved in a chaotic, delightful game of stumbling after the rolling ball, collapsing in giggles, and being helped up by a beaming Ifioma. Chijioke and Aisha sat on the step, watching. Aisha had a small mound of mending in her lap, but her hands were still. "Sir," she said softly, her eyes on the children. "What she gives them, it is not the food or the things. It is this." She gestured to the joyful chaos. "She plays with them. She sees them as people. That is the greatest gift." Chijioke nodded, a lump in his throat. He knew she was right. Ifioma was giving them the childhood he had tried to smother her with. A childhood of attention, of play, of shared laughter. She was, without knowing it, healing them both. The Sunday visits became the axis around which both families spun. For Aisha, it was a weekly infusion of hope and normalcy, a reminder that her world was now connected to one of stability and kindness. For Chijioke, it was a weekly lesson in the simple, messy, glorious business of living. And for Ifioma, it was simply home, a second home where she was needed, loved, and utterly, completely herself. The fortress walls had not just been breached, they had been rendered irrelevant by the sacred, shared space of a small living room rug and the sound of 5 little girls laughing. Laughter on the floor. The Sunday sun streamed through the lace curtains of Aisha's living room, dappling the worn but spotless rug with patterns of light and shadow. This was no longer the scene of a charitable visit. It was a well-worn stage for a weekly play, its rituals as comforting as liturgy. Chijioke sat in his usual chair, a simple plastic one that had become his throne in this kingdom of domesticity. In his hands was a chipped mug of strong tea Aisha had prepared, the aroma of ginger and cloves cutting through the sweeter scents of baby powder and stew simmering in the kitchen. He had shed his tailored blazer, his sleeves rolled up. He was, here, simply Daddy, or, as the quadruplets had begun to burble, Dadi. The center of the room was where life erupted. Ifeoma, now a confident 6.5-year-old ringmaster, sat cross-legged in the middle of the rug. The 4 stars orbited her in various states of disarray. Amara, the de facto leader, was trying to stuff a too large plastic ring onto Ifeoma's toe. Awa was meticulously arranging and rearranging a line of colorful pegs, her brow furrowed in concentration. Alhari had claimed the prized stuffed rabbit and was whispering secrets to its one floppy ear. Anu, the baby of the bunch even by minutes, was content to simply lean against Ifeoma's back, sucking her thumb and watching the chaos with serene, heavy-lidded eyes. "Okay, stars," Ifeoma announced, her voice taking on the storytelling tone she'd perfected. "Today, the magic blocks are not for towers. Today they are boats, and we are sailing to the land of jollof rice." This was met with gleeful babbling. The blocks were repurposed. Chijioke watched, a quiet smile on his face, as his daughter, in her expensive cotton dress now smudged with biscuit crumbs, guided tiny hands. She showed Awa how to push her boat across the blue-patterned sea of the rug. She helped Amara balance a smaller peg person on her block. She gently pried the rabbit from Alhari's grip to give it a roll as captain, and elicited a gurgling laugh from Anu by making her block jump over a fold in the fabric. Then, the laughter began. It started with Amara, a high, hiccuping giggle as her boat crashed into Ifeoma's knee. It spread to Awa, who found the collision absurdly funny. Alhari's chuckle was a soft, breathy sound, and even Anu removed her thumb to release a milky, delighted squeal. Ifeoma, caught in the contagion, threw her head back and laughed. A full, unself-conscious sound that filled the small room. It was this laughter that captivated Chijioke. It wasn't the polite tinkling of a party or the manufactured glee of a cartoon. It was the pure, unfiltered music of childhood joy, created from nothing but imagination and shared presence. It was a sound utterly absent from the marble halls of his mansion. He saw Ifeoma's face, flushed with happiness, her eyes crinkled shut. In that unguarded moment, he did not see a grieving child or a lonely heiress. He saw Kayamika's spirit, not in somber philanthropy, but in this, in the creation of pure, simple joy. His wife had believed that the soul of the gift was seeing. Ifeoma had mastered that. She saw the quadruplets not as projects, but as playmates. She saw their need for fun, for silliness, for a sister. His gaze traveled from his daughter's laughing face to the 4 little girls who adored her. He saw Amara's fierce independence, Awa's quiet focus, Alhari's dreamy tenderness, Anu's peaceful affection. They were individuals, blossoming under the twin suns of their mother's relentless love and this unexpected, weekly infusion of playful grace. The listless ghosts from the park corner were gone, replaced by vibrant, noisy, demanding little people. Aisha came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She paused in the doorway, watching the scene on the floor. Her own face, once a mask of weary survival, was soft with a contentment so deep it was palpable. She met Chijioke's eyes across the room, and they shared a look of silent, profound understanding. This, the laughter on the floor, was the true harvest. The shop, the flat, the allowance. They were the soil and the fence. This joy was the fruit. Ifioma, catching her breath, spotted her father watching. She scooped up Anu and crawled over to him, depositing the warm, drowsy child into his lap. Daddy, you're not playing. Anu wants a boat ride with you. Chijiok, the billionaire, looked down at the trusting face of the little girl in his lap, her head already snuggling against his chest. He looked at his own daughter's expectant, flour-dusted face. Without a word, he carefully slid from the chair to the floor, settling Anu in the crook of his arm. With his free hand, he picked up a blue block. Captain Anu reporting for duty, he intoned in a silly voice. The sea of jollof rice is choppy today. Ifioma's resulting laugh was even brighter, and the other 3 stars immediately scrambled over, clambering onto him, a wriggling, giggling pile of humanity. He was buried in their affection, surrounded by their shrieks of delight. In that moment, on the floor of a modest flat in Agba, Chijioka was not a titan of industry nursing a broken heart. He was simply a man being healed by laughter. The final, frozen shard of grief within him melted, not in a dramatic collapse, but in the warm, gentle wave of his daughter's happiness and the unconditional acceptance of 4 little girls who knew him only as the man who made silly voices and gave safe airplane rides. The fortress was gone. In its place was this rug, this laughter, this sacred, ordinary Sunday. The living legacy. The soft, humid air of a Lagos Sunday evening settled over Agba, carrying the distant sounds of gospel music from a neighbor's radio and the fragrant smoke of evening meals. Inside Aisha's flat, the chaos of the day had gentled into a warm, drowsy peace. The 4 stars, exhausted from their adventures as pirates and princesses, had been bathed and were now piled onto the double bed in Aisha's room, a tangled, sighing heap of limbs in clean pajamas. Ifioma had helped with the bathing, an event that involved more splashing than cleaning, and her own hair was slightly damp at the temples. She sat now on the floor of the living room, leaning against her father's legs as he occupied the plastic chair. Aisha sat opposite on the small sofa, a basket of mending by her feet, but her hands were still. A contented silence stretched between them, filled with the residue of laughter and the soft breathing from the bedroom. Ifioma tilted her head back to look up at her father. "Daddy," she said, her voice a sleepy murmur. "Amara says my name." She said Fioma. "Almost right. She's a clever star," Chijiok rumbled, his hand coming to rest on her head. Aisha smiled. "They talk about her all week. When is big sister coming? Will she bring the storybook with the lion?" She shook her head, wonder in her voice. "You have given us everything, sir. A life." Chijiok looked around the room, at the prints of Mecca and Jerusalem on the wall, the small, functional television, the sturdy second-hand furniture. It was a world away from his own, yet it pulsed with a vitality his mansion often lacked. His gaze returned to Aisha, to the calm strength in her eyes that had replaced desperation. "No, Aisha," he said, his voice low and sure. "You had the life, the courage, the love for your girls that kept you on that mat when others would have run. We just cleared some weeds and let the sun in." He paused, the metaphor feeling apartment. His wife had always spoken of hearts as gardens. Ifioma twisted to look at him, her cheek against his knee. "Mummy's son," she stated simply. The words hung in the quiet room. Mummy's son. Chijiok felt their truth resonate in his bones. The money, the flat, the shop, they were just tools. The real force, the healing light, had been Kayamika's spirit, reflected and amplified through their daughter. Ifioma had been the prism, taking the stark, blinding beam of their grief and loss and casting it out as a spectrum of practical kindness, a food offering, a steadfast friendship, a weekly dose of joy. He thought of the past year. The leaden suit of grief was gone. He still carried the weight of loss, but it was now a locket next to his heart, not a suffocating shroud. He thought of his daughter's laughter, so freely given here on this rug. He thought of the unguarded joy on Aisha's face when she spoke of her first big tailoring commission. He thought of the 4 stars, whose names, grace, beauty, gift, and mercy, now felt like a blessing spoken over all of them. This was the legacy, not a name on a building or a balance in a bank account. It was a living, breathing network of care. It was a little girl who remembered to see. It was a mother given the tools to fight. It was 4 children who would grow up knowing kindness as a tangible, weekly visitor. It was a billionaire who had rediscovered his own humanity not in a boardroom, but on a floor covered in toy blocks. Yes, he finally said, his voice thick with an emotion too vast for any one word. He looked down at Ifioma, her eyes drooping closed. Your mummy's son. And you, Ifam, you are its brightest ray. He stood then, gently lifting a sleeping Ifioma into his arms. She nestled against his shoulder with a soft sigh. Aisha rose, her hands clasped before her. Thank you, sir, for everything. For today. Thank you, Aisha, he replied, his meaning encompassing far more than the Sunday visit. For letting us in. He carried Ifioma out to the car, the sounds of the neighborhood a gentle soundtrack to their departure. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Chijioke looked back at the modest building. In a second-floor window, a light was on in the flat he had provided. In the shop down in Ajij, a sign bearing 4 stars hung proudly. The river of his wife's compassion had not just flowed. It had created tributaries, watering new lives, shaping a new landscape. Ifioma stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. Daddy, she mumbled, already halfway back to dreams. Heaven was close today. He held her tighter, pressing a kiss to her forehead. In the quiet of the car, moving through the glowing Lagos night, he finally understood. Heaven hadn't been something to visit or make close. It was something you built, brick by brick, meal by meal, laugh by laugh, with the broken pieces of your own heart and the willing hands of those you learned to see. It was built in orphanages, on park corners, in tailor shops, and on living room floors. And his wife, through the unerring heart of their daughter, had shown him how. The fortress was gone. In its place stood an open garden, and at its center, a living, flowing wellspring of love. The story wasn't about an ending, but a beautiful, ongoing beginning. Yes, NWAM, he whispered into her hair, as the city lights blurred into a river of gold outside the window. It is a living legacy. Thank you for reading. If this story of kindness, family, and healing warmed your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder of hope today. Subscribe for more moving Nigerian stories about love, resilience, and the unexpected ways our lives connect. There are countless stories waiting to be told. Yours could be next.